Developers are being robbed. Shitty environments, shitty cultures are stealing from our developers to be productive and to be able to focus.
Terrible. Lots and lots of meetings, pointless meetings maybe.
Meetings, Slack, interruptions.
Failing pipelines.
I'm a professional document hunter. Take them out and we go and look for documents everywhere.
Slow pipelines is my pet hate personally. Anything over, 5 minutes kind of makes me twitch.
While I'm waiting for a slow build, I do love waiting for a code review. Can you please review my code, pretty please?
Yeah, leave it with me. I'll get back to you. So, Fred, from all of our years of experience and wisdom, there are certainly things I think that we've learned about in our careers, things that enable developers to go out and improve their environment, get their productive focus time back. I think one of the biggest things that contributes to this and helps is automation. What do you reckon?
Automation, a big game changer.
So what kind of automation, Fred? What do you think is, like, automation is a big fancy word that covers a lot of things. What do you think's the most critical bits?
Testing is probably the key one for me. I would even go a bit further to the ability to spin up your environment, right? So if you're going to start doing code, the ability to pull down code from GitHub, hit a command, build, run the code, make changes, test, deploy, test, pipelines, test. Do I need to test if you heard what I just said? But
more testing, you say?
Yeah, testing.
I feel a lot more productive when I have automated tests around me. Maybe it's like a security blanket these days. I don't feel quite right if I don't have, a group of tests that gives me feedback on what I'm doing and I'm going in the right direction. So I think deployments, Fred, are one of the most important things to automate. Over my career, I've been the guy who's built a server and then a year later, totally forgotten of how I built it or what I did to set it up. It was like a special Snowflake server that had all sorts of year of hacks and fixes and changes, and I didn't have things automated. I think now that's one of my clear requirements. I think if I'm working on any system, I want it to be reproducible. I want it to be automated, deployment, infrastructure as code, all the good things.
I call it as code because everything as code.
Yeah.
When I go to get my coffee in the morning, I get coffee as code.
If you were to give some advice to a software developer who is working within a team and they're interested in doing more automation to improve their work environment, to improve their focus time, what do you think? Where should they start? How would they go about this?
Start on your local machine. So if you're writing tests, the ability to execute those tests as part of any build process and to be able to have the ongoing visibility of the test running in the environment.
Yeah, I have heard at a couple of points in my career that there have been places where people have worked where the rule is no tests, and so developers have done them locally and ran them locally, but not committed them into version control. So maybe that's the way around it. We need a bit more skunkworks automated testing.
It's got to run locally.
Fred, one of my favorite things is fast feedback and fast tooling, fast builds. Even like we're just talking about tests, fast test execution. I'm into fast. That's like one of my favorite things, I think.
I like fast. I think if you're working in an environment where the organization is giving you some really good tools, right? Good IDEs, anything that is helping you to deliver good quality code fast and to allow you to focus in that IDE environment. So everything's integrated. That's the key word, integrated.
I actually, in my personal, most of my development experience, I didn't have like a fully integrated development environment over those years. But what I found critical was the idea of fast feedback. If I make a change to a system or to some code, I want to get feedback immediately through like very fast running tests to show me immediately what maybe something that's broken, if I'm using test-driven development, I kind of need that fast feedback. If I don't get fast enough feedback, I find that my brain tends to wander. Maybe it's a lack of attention, but it's just if I'm in the zone and I'm focusing, fast feedback is the thing that keeps me in the zone, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, if you're making a change and you can get quick results, give you an indication that you didn't break anything, and also to be able to get feedback in the impact of the change you've made. I think that is very important.
So if like I have worked on code bases before, which even with a nice fancy integrated IDE thing, it was slow. So slow to run tests, slow to even do a build or to load up your environment in the first place. What do you think developers can do to start the journey on this?
Are we talking about chunky monoliths that is gone beyond what they're supposed to be? That's a hard one. I I think that for me the golden rule there would be as you're working in it. So one is to accept that you're not going to get the same experience as if you were running a microservice or something small that is maybe developed in a um, in a more distributed way. But you can contribute to improvements over time. And there's tools out there that can help you with making suggestions and some refactoring or identifying key areas that is, identifying the key areas that is going to give you the big bang for buck at the end of the day. So you can make some changes. So if there's no test, start writing tests in the space. But there's no way that I think you can go out and say, well, I'm going to try and improve everything. There's a few things you can do along the way to make it better.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been a code base I've worked on just recently, actually, that had fairly broad test coverage that was fairly slow, and it used, it was fairly slow. And I was working on something where I was wanting very fast feedback. So what I did was I just modified the local tooling just so I could run the tests that I was interested in. So I was focused in a particular area, and every time I made a change, I could just run the test suite for one small part of it. So I had to put a little bit of work in to get the tooling to do that. But I think that was time well spent, because I think the time I worked on that code base was about like a 3-week thing where I was working on it day to day for 3 weeks. I probably spent about a good couple of hours probably at the beginning just setting up a process where I could get fast feedback. And I was actually creating like new code paths and things like that. So I created like new classes, new modules, that kind of stuff, where I could isolate it and I could run that separately very quickly. And then at the end of the 3 weeks, I kind of brought it back more into integration with the rest of the system. So maybe patterns like that work pretty well. All right, Fred. So I know there's something that's close to your heart, which is having good documentation in a system.
Documentation. Yeah. Finding documentation. Actually, not just finding updated, relevant documentation. Or finding documentation that, if you look at the author or this who actually created it, does not say deactivated. Yeah. Like this person's no longer with us.
Yes. Yeah. I think up-to-date documentation is a massive challenge. I don't think it's really been solved very well across all sorts of teams that I've worked with in the past. It's really hard. I tend to lean towards like tests written as documentation, but there's still a set of documentation that's more contextual around like maybe the bigger system or the environment or the world that you're playing in, right? A lot of that you can't really put into a group of tests and how systems interact with each other and things like that.
You need documentation. Right? And sometimes I think it's not the fact that we have documentation. I think it's the either the way or the mechanisms we have to ensure the documentation is up to date.
Yeah. What do you think about actually finding documentation? Because it's one thing to create it and to keep it up to date, but I don't know. I find that just even finding things is actually a massive challenge in itself.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? Now, the exciting part about this is now there's tools out there that integrate with your documentation to the point where multiple of your sources, document sources like Google Docs or Confluence, Jira, Slack, GitHub, and then it brings all of that into your environment. So when you start asking questions, and we were talking earlier about IDE integration, bringing it into the IDE, where if you're thinking about making a code change, it brings that document focus closer to you as an engineer.
Yeah. Well, that's all well and good, Fred, and it sounds great. But if I'm a developer in a team and we have no documentation, where do I start?
You have no documentation.
Let's say we have nothing.
It's actually, so you're talking about just code, your code base, right?
Well, I think
Because I got an answer for that.
Yeah, give me the first answer, and then
I
we
know,
go
I've got
from
an
there.
answer for that. And, people would say, he's drinking the Kool-Aid. But if you got a chatty friend in your IDE, right? If you don't have any documentation, you just look at the code, especially if you've got an enterprise version, because then it brings even more context into it, and you can just explain this. What is this doing? And you can actually use that to generate some form of documentation. It doesn't guarantee that it's 100% correct, but it's at least putting you closer to the point where you have some form of understanding.
So maybe at that level, there's a opportunity for like a README in every code base.
Well, there should be a README. Yeah.
But maybe not just a README. Maybe there's important things to add in the README. There was one project I created recently, which was in a tech that the team in general wasn't familiar with. And I documented quite extensively, how to deal with this technology because it's slightly different to what we've done in the past. So I had to put a whole bunch of things in there to say, when you're setting up your environment to work on this is how you do it. This is the kind of thing you've got to be careful about. This is kind of the benefits, or, this is how it differs, I think, from what we usually do. Some of that context has to come from you, I think. But I think, like, thinking about, I guess it's like an empathetic angle. Like, think about a new developer coming into your code base. Can you give them a README which is actually informative, point them in the right direction? Not all of the documentation, of course, has to be in the README, but if it's pointing to somewhere else or other positions where that makes sense to put things, maybe that's kind of like the bare minimum starting point.
I think that it's got to live close to, almost want to say it needs to live close to the audience. So if the organization's at the point where they invested in their GitHub as a source control, and they don't have an internal developer portal, right? And you want to ensure that there's a clear availability of some form of instruction, some form of runbook, rollback, etc. Then I would say that needs to be that's your go-to, and it should live close to the source code.
If you have nothing, start with a README. If you have READMEs, maybe look at maybe it's like an onion, I suppose, right? You've got like the central part, which is your code, put some documentation around that. As you get broader into the systems and how other things interact with each other, then maybe it's like starting to document that and how things interact, what context matters when you're thinking about the system as a whole. And I guess it's just kind of and I think there's nothing to stop a developer usually from just taking initiative and starting that process. I don't think they need to ask permission, and I don't think they need to, necessarily have a bunch of gates or checks on things. Just start to document what you know about the system, start communicating it and pushing it out to people. And I think it's just taking the initiative is probably one of the main things.
I think the same rules that we have for when we're writing code before it goes to production. Code reviews, I think document reviews, getting peers to review your document, to give feedback, input becomes very important. And that's where the quality really comes into play. And as a team that wants to invest in productivity and focus and improving that focus, is to, as part of ways of working, have those checks along the way to say, right, we need to check this documentation again. The way we're structuring it in a maturity journey of where we are as a team, do we need to adjust there? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it'd be great to hear from people, other developers, how they've met these kind of challenges, how they get their productive focus time back. We can be quite empathetic with their shitty environments if they want to share that with us.
I would love to hear about shitty environments.
The
We
shitty
always,
environments that have been overcome. That's kind of
yeah.
like the feel good story, you know.
Well, if there's something we didn't talk about today there, right?
Yeah,
So
that's probably a
we
good point.
highlighted a few key things we think are the challenges that we're experiencing.
Yeah,
We're keen to hear about other stuff that's out there, or suggestions on how to improve
yeah,
focus and productivity.
definitely agreed. Awesome. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Dan. That was awesome.
Awesome.